They're deep into the Rockies, so we're to forcibly extract the ringleaders. The reason I requested Agent Grace was because of the possibility of avalanches. They know the terrain, they blocked out the last extraction team by causing an avalanche. So am I to cause them or prevent them? Alliyah asked, a bit astonished by the snake-like, cold, calculating demeanor of Agent Darton. So what type of resistance are we to expect? Questioned Cormac. Small arms, homemade traps, and all because these pricks didn't want to pay their taxes. Wesley Snipes could have told you. The tax man don't play, said Daniel, switching his voice for comedic effect. He got a few chuckles. As the helo passed over the valley, the pilot came over the loudspeakers. Hold on, deploying chaff. Chaff? What the fuck? Said Cormac, with confusion while looking out the window. Firecracker-like chaff flickered with tiny explosions, tricking the RPG into early detonations. Cormac slid open the door and greeted the chilling wind with a minigun. He couldn't see the faces of his attackers, and with the makeup of the valley, they were very big ducks in a shooting gallery. Cormac blazed the guns, but they were like camouflaged insects in all the white. Another missile shot at the copter. Leah knew it was lined up right. Suddenly, the chaff popped, saving them for a second time. Only a matter if we run out of chaff before they run out of rockets, said Daniels. How many chaff we got left, Luke? Agent Darton yelled up into the cockpit. That was it, the pilot said. Alliyah's fear of falling suddenly took a back seat to the more immediate fear of being blown up. She stood next to Cormac, who peppered the snow with gunshots. Another missile appeared from the ether. It was a straight shot. This time there was absolutely nothing anyone could do about it. Alliyah decided that was a false statement. She looked the rocket right in its mechanical heart and screamed. The force was so great the rocket sputtered and fell from the sky with its strings cut. The force of the scream pushed the helo blades down, tipping everyone over. Then a chain reaction happened down below. A cacophony of Alliyah's voice echoed throughout the valley. Avalanches struck like timed detonations, and the mountain seemed as if it puckered in on itself. When the beautiful disaster come, Agent Darton yelled up to Lou. Put us down here. We'll wait for cover of night. The bird landed, and the team looked at Alliyah as if they had heard through her the voice of God. Alejandro touched his ears and wiped away a bit of blood from the ordeal. To break the silence, Daniels blurted, I don't think anyone is going to object to the call sign Echo. Matthew was a slave to his own weakness, for he lacked the strength to change his brothers from fear of ostracization. For the past few months, he was the resident executioner. Dan threw people to him like feeding Christians to the lions. He had given quite a few people glorious deaths by combat, most of which he vaguely understood why. He stood in a snow-capped valley over the unmarked graves of those warriors he had no clue how to return to their people. He didn't know how to pray for them or honor them. It was his hope that his presence showed some measure of remorse. Dan further sullied the nearly untainted snow to stand at Matthew's side. Dan seemed to always have an idea where he was and never seemed to let him have too much time to sit by himself and think. He was never much of a judge of the motivations of men, but he sensed something was different between them ever since his powers were realized. He wasn't unusually fast or strong, but his reflexes ramped up to unnatural levels. When he reacted, it was as if things were moving in slow motion. Dan used to claim his ancestors were descended from the gods, and he had no reason not to believe him. It didn't matter one way or the other, but now that he was attempting to factor him into his mythology and give him some sort of touch by the gods backstory, he began to take issue with it all. This was unnecessary, Dan. All these people, Matthew said in a whisper. Dan didn't get upset. In fact, it was the opposite. He put his arm around Matthew like a big brother. You do not see the wholeness of God's plan for you, but I do. If you cannot trust in my judgment or your own, trust in theirs, for they are wiser than we shall ever be. Matthew took Dan's words to heart because they felt true to him. They gave him hope. Suddenly, the two heard the most ear-piercing echo they had ever heard, then the telling rumble of a devastating avalanche. "How's the plane?" Agent Darton grilled the pilot. "Seems fine. Do you want me to risk flying out and getting you come nightfall? Because I doubt that anyone's close to setting up after all that." "We're gonna be all night trudging through that shit," Daniel said, looking at the tons upon tons of collapsed snow. Agent Darton gave Daniels an icy cold stare. He looked at her huge sat phone, then shook it briskly. The thing had a washed-out LED display, glassy as a 3-day-old corpse. "Check your walkies," she ordered the rest. All the unit did, but their tech had been shorted out too. "Was that some sort of EMP?" said Joe, an older woman in the unit. "I doubt it. Could have been the sonic scream from Echo, more likely," Daniels theorized. "You're gonna need to take a catalog of everything you can do," said Agent Darton. "You and me both," Alliyah said, as if she was just as surprised her powers reached another level. "So is this mission a wash?" asked Cormac to Darton. "I'm not ready to give up yet." Some of the perimeter scouts relayed the info that government waxies had coptered in with a new sonic weapon. Dan corrected the scout and reminded him of the super weapon that rattled California right off the fault line. Dan assembled a group of their finest, which always included Matthew as first in command. Brothers had dug in this winter and were all repelling government encroachment. They had on mismatched vests and oddly out-of-place guns, some for hunting, some antiques, and some used solely for the purpose of killing other men. "When we find these intruders, no mercy, put them down quickly and cleanly. Make the All-Father proud," Dan preached to the hunting party with the convictions of a fanatic. The agents took all day, but they traversed uphill through the valley. While there were signs of the lost lawless civilization of outlaws, they didn't encounter any physically, though their luck ran out. The snow-capped terrain served as a perfect backdrop for this canvas of death. Gunfire erupted, sending small trickling echoes trembling through the valley. Daniels took a bad hit in the chest. Alliyah took time out of the firefight to patch him up. Cormac and Agent Darton took flanking positions. It was hard to tell who was hit and who was fine. As ready as Alliyah was, this was her first firefight, and though she was holding it together rather well inside, she was plagued with doubt and fear. Dan sat propped up against a rock. They had superior numbers, but these agents were far more well-trained than them. Matthew held his rifle like a foreign object. He was barely even considered a novice when it came to these. A few brothers were cut down. "Go out there and advance us," Dan yelled over AR fire. Matthew may have considered the tactical imposition of the request had not one of his brothers fell not 20 feet from his person. He emerged from the rock unfazed by the gunfire, beeline towards Agent Darton and Cormac. They saw him running persistently, if not swiftly, through the heavy snow. They focused on Matthew intently, figuring he merely lost the will to live and had decided to finish it. The agents opened fire vigorously. Though Matthew was too physically slow to dodge an actual bullet, he could pivot before the agent's fingers pulled the trigger. He saw it all in slow motion, but the agent saw him twist and dodge like a whirlwind. Matthew closed in moments before Agent Darton could think about ducking back behind cover. Matthew threw a dagger which hit her square in the throat. Cormac bellowed so loud, Alliyah took notice and turned just in time to see her drop to the snow. When Matthew moved to throw his second knife to finish off Cormac, he heard an ear-piercing noise and saw waves of sound as a physical thing. He was thrown off in equilibrium, stumbling to one knee. The government's sonic weapon wasn't a device, it was a person. Cormac fired his artillery when he noticed Matthew stagger. Alliyah held herself back. She had tried to focus her attention to just Matthew because full force could cause an avalanche and bury them all alive and cripple both sides equally. Matthew found the presence of mind to evade Cormac's shots, but it was not with the same confidence he entered the battle with. He now knew the fear that his brothers felt anytime they entered conflict. Matthew slipped on ice, dodging the hail of gunfire, and saw Alliyah intensifying her sonic scream. His ears bled. He didn't have time to think. With his offhand, he detached the clip of his rifle and flung it like a ninja star. The ejected clip hit Alliyah in the throat, and the awful wailing stopped.